Greetings, this is a coronavirus COVID-19 update for 2/25/2020. And as usual, we'll start by looking at the Baidu numbers. Baidu is a Chinese search engine, and they have a site here where it's a tracker, coronavirus tracker for China only. And these are 6 numbers that they publish every day. And if you get on here at the right time, which lately has been noon the next day, our time, or I'm sorry, noon the next day, China time, then you can see the deltas from the day before. But if you happen to miss these, the delta numbers, the changes from the day before, are also on the graphs, if the graphs are available on time. So this is, updated. You can see it's updated 11:41, which is getting close to noonish on China time, which would be 11:41 p.m. Eastern Time Zone, U.S. Or actually, I'm sorry, 10:41 p.m. So the confirmed diagnosis is 43,296, and that's down 2,300 from the day before. Cumulative diagnosis is 78,630 so far cases in China. And the difference between these: confirmed is the old way to diagnose a case with blood work and microscope work, and cumulative includes those cases plus new diagnostic procedures that have been defined a couple weeks ago. Suspected new cases 2,358, that's up 508, but that's way down from the past. And cumulative cure, which China calls this cure, you'll see another service in a minute where we call it recovered, which is a much better term because 32,000 people haven't been cured by China. These are, the fatality rate or mortality rate of this coronavirus is, somewhere around 2%, 2 to 2.5%, depending on what province you're in and what part of the world you're in. It looks like Iran has 50%, but usually people just, that are tested positive for coronavirus just get cold symptoms for a few days, and they overcome the virus, the cold, the flu. So most of these people were not cured. They showed no symptoms, so they went home and they were basically isolated at home, and they recovered. Existing severe cases, these are ICU cases where somebody, this is typically older people who have some form of pneumonia that's keeping them in the ICU, or maybe, they have a weak heart, a weak something, and they're in pretty bad shape, so they're in an intensive care unit. And cumulative deaths so far, 2,747 deaths in China. Then if you scroll down, you see this map that doesn't really change every day now because there's not enough going on to shift one province up to the worst. There's the worst province is Hubei, which is in the middle there, and the surrounding provinces are, not quite as bad, and then there's some lighter provinces in China. Then if you scroll down, you see graph number 1, which changed today. So they added another thing here. Oh, they put the recovered on here. They put recovered on here on the same graph. So this is a graph showing across the top. You can see new confirmed, suspected, cured, which is recovered, and death trends nationwide. So the red line is new diagnosed cases, and there's 440 new ones for today, which doesn't correspond with the earlier number we saw. And then suspected cases are in gold, and that went up 508 today. Cured cases, 2,756 new cured or overcome, recovered cases today. And deaths only up 29, which is very, very low compared to what it has been. It's usually somewhere in the 90s to over 100, up to maybe 130, 140, 150. Then the second graph, all these things are on the same Baidu page. So first is the chart that shows the 6 numbers, and then if you scroll down you see the map, which isn't doing much, and then you see graph number 1 and graph number 2. This is graph number 2. So this shows non-Hubei province, cases up 31 from the day before, and Hubei up, suspected cases are up 409. I'm sorry, that's not suspected, that's cases for Hubei. And then nationals up 440 confirmed cases for today. And if you scroll down further, you see a list of provinces, and this, not much is happening here. Deaths go up a little bit. Henan province and Heilongjiang province, which is where Harbin is, a way northern province, are pretty heavy in deaths outside of Hubei for China, because most provinces only have up to maybe 4 or 5. You see some here at 6 at the top of the list. But 20 and 13 are pretty heavy because of developments we covered a few days ago or several days ago. Henan being, some prisons, some people. Henan province is actually between Chengdu and Wuhan. So it's a very populated province just west of Hubei province. So that's, one reason you see more here is it's basically on the outskirts of Hubei, and another reason was there were some prison people that were confirmed, and I don't know if anybody died from a prison yet. And the other province where Harbin is, Harbin had an ice festival, which is a international ice festival, big event in China that starts around mid-December. That was canceled early this year, but still it was a gathering of a lot of people, and China basically canceled Chinese New Year's, and that got canceled too. But there were a lot of people that gathered at this festival long before any lockdown happened in Wuhan. Then we see searches for today. So like I said, Baidu is a search engine. So these are all searches that are related to coronavirus. And these are the terms that are the hottest search terms for today. So if you read across, the terms don't always make sense. Sometimes you can't even tell what they're searching for. But the stories behind them are, things that I usually talk about 3, maybe a day, or 4. And here I've got 7 marked to talk about. So the first one, a Buddhist temple kneeling blanket. They detected a virus on that after some people became sick from, who visited a Buddhist temple, and they found virus on the kneeling blanket. So let's take a look at these stories in the next couple pages. So we're going to go over these top 7 stories because there's 7 interesting stories that I didn't see covered in Western papers, except for Abe. So the first thing is there's a temple, a Buddhist temple, where 7 people were confirmed to have coronavirus, which is high for this area because nobody, there weren't many cases of coronavirus outside of the temple. So they started looking into the temple itself and found that there's a kneeling blanket there there was coronavirus on the blanket. Of course, that doesn't necessarily prove that the first person gave coronavirus to the blanket and then everybody else got it from the blanket. They could have gotten it from each other, and the virus just fell to the blanket. So, but anyways, I would imagine that whole place has been disinfected now and don't have to worry about that anymore. And that those people are put in confinement, and the rest of the congregation is being quarantined or at least closely looked at. The second story is this agricultural university is in an area where there's not many cases, and they're calling people back to school. Said, hey, if you haven't reported to school yet, report to school. We're an agricultural school and we're on the front line of this, so you need to come back to school. The third one is Abe, and he announced that all major events in Japan would be canceled for 2 weeks. And most of Japan's cases are people coming off the cruise ship, because that cruise ship that had 600 some or 700 some cases was a Japanese ship. So there's a lot of and its home base is Japan, so there's a lot of Japanese people that were on that cruise ship. But just to be safe, he's canceling a lot of events in Japan, all major events, for a couple weeks. Japan, they're getting ready for the Olympics here, just 4 months away. So they want to contain things pretty fast. And then the fourth story was South Korea. The parliament met and amended 3 laws. And the first law was an infectious disease law. There's another set of laws covering quarantine, and then there's a third set of laws that are medical law. So they amended all those to to account for the coronavirus. Then the last 3 stories. This first one's pretty interesting because China was pretty quick to criticize the United States for canceling flights from China. First from Hubei, and then later from all of China. So China criticized the United States for not following the WHO routine, where that wasn't deemed necessary. So here's China treating South Korea in an even worse way. So these people boarded a airliner from South Korea heading for Shandong province in China, and when they arrived, all 163 people were put into quarantine for 2 weeks. So this is something these people didn't anticipate. Probably a lot of these people were going to China for a week, maybe a week-long business trip or something like that, or maybe to meet family. But they probably didn't anticipate being put in quarantine as soon as they got off the plane, because they probably wouldn't have gone there if they'd have known that was going to happen. And then the second story is the World Health Organization announcing that there's more new cases outside of China now than inside of China. Because inside of China, we just saw the graphs, they're about 500 some a day, which is mild compared to Italy and South Korea and other Western countries. And then the last story, what's that? Oh yeah, this this is a controversial thing that probably someday somebody will figure out what happened here. But this is a story that broke about one of the earliest people to be detected for coronavirus says that he was never in this seafood market. So that's weird, maybe, but I mean, this is a big seafood market in Wuhan. It's the biggest one in Wuhan. So maybe he was, in contact with somebody who was at the seafood market. But this kind of sparks, speculation that another thing in Wuhan is China's biggest virus laboratory. And in this laboratory, there was somebody who, somebody in a prominent position in the laboratory made the statement that they were studying viruses from bats and doing some kind of comparison to them, to the SARS virus, which made the hop to humans, where this new virus found in bats had not infected humans yet. And then all of a sudden the new virus mutated and started infecting humans. So there's speculation that the virus initially came from that laboratory. It got leaked out of the laboratory somehow. And that's been going back and forth for a long time. And this is just a story about this guy saying that he never was at that seafood market, and that kind of backs up that, speculation that maybe it came from a laboratory, or at least people used it for that. So that's the 7 top stories for today. Then we look at the Johns Hopkins. This is a Johns Hopkins research lab or research institute, and they've been tracking this for a long time. So China, the earlier slides that you saw all came from China, from Baidu. They're tracking inside of China. And this Johns Hopkins tracks the whole world, the global look. So these are today's numbers. Total confirmed 82,164. So the first thing I do with this is I take a look at Baidu's latest number, and that's saying that China mainland has 78,630 confirmed cases now, where Johns Hopkins says it's only 78,500 roughly. So we're 130 short, 133. So you would add that number to the 82,164 and come up with something really close to 83,000 right now. So that's where we are. Then the next thing I do is take a look at the changes in the numbers from the day before, and then I try to find stories to explain why these numbers are going up. So South Korea, the numbers are going up like crazy. Again, with the major issue in South Korea is this Christian religious sect where it started spreading internally within that group of people first, and then started spreading to hospitals and hospital workers and other people. But it could be traced to that religious sect, and particularly to one 61-year-old woman who they're calling a super spreader. So that's what's going on in South Korea. We keep getting more and more and more cases there because why? Because just like everywhere else in the world, like Italy, Iran, normally your healthcare people aren't wearing, virus suits and masks all day. They only do that if there's some kind of virus threat. So, the first few people to go into a hospital with an illness, and it turns out to be coronavirus, it isn't hard for them to spread it to hospital staff. So that's, how it started spreading elsewhere. Plus, those people in the religious sect, had contact with people not in the religious sect. But it's all one part of this, town that Daegu is the name of the town, city, on the about 2.5 million people population in the south east of South Korea. Then we take a look at Italy. Italy's, going crazy, and nobody's quite sure, how the stuff started in Italy. But it started in northern townships in Italy, and particularly one small town where there were a lot of people getting sick, and they tested positive for coronavirus. So we had 322 yesterday and 453 today, and that's a pretty good increase. And right now there's roads blocked off. If you take a look at the picture on the upper right, this is canceling a soccer match between, Champions League soccer match, a pretty good size soccer match was canceled, and they're taking other measures, blocking roads. There's what they call a red zone now, where they've defined, this is the people that we want to keep contained. No cars are allowed in or out, so it's basically a lockdown inside of this red zone. But there's also been some cases that have snuck out to other cities, and those are, being quarantined too. But the main issue with Italy is those, northern towns. And in Japan, I already talked about Japan, being most of these people came off the cruise ship. And you can see there's a story down there about Tokyo. This is rehearsals for the Olympics, and they did a rehearsal lighting ceremony, and some runners, but the actual torch that comes from Athens every year and travels across the world and then goes to Japan, it's not there yet. It hasn't started its journey yet. But they're just doing rehearsals. Just everybody that's an Olympic host country has to do rehearsals. And then there's a map on the lower right that kind of pertains to all of these, where, Italy and the rest of Europe. So this is a map where it's kind of like the Baidu map, where it shows, Italy has the most infections now with over 300, and now that's actually 450. And the rest of Europe, there's some countries near Italy that are now being infected because the original outbreak is in northern Italy. Then we go down to two more countries, Iran and the U.S. And this Iran, it had nobody really knows how many people are infected in Iran, but one article that I read and mentioned a few days ago coming from Fox News said that there were 50 people who died in one town, but the official death rate now in Iran is 16. But even at 16 instead of 50, 16 is really high for 139 cases. So people think that, judging from the number of people that have died, that the number of cases is far bigger than 139. But there's a news article here where Iran has no plans to quarantine cities. They're just saying, people wear some masks and, don't worry about it too much. In the U.S. now it's 60. We were at, 14, and then 15, then 16. The 15th person, we're at 14 for about a week. The 15th person was the first person in Texas, and then the 16th person was another person in California. And then we got people that were repatriated from the cruise ship. So the cruise ship was supposed to have 45 infected Americans out of over 100 passengers, and they're back in the U.S. now, so they're included in the U.S. number. So that's where we sit today. Then I always take a look at trends on this graph. As you can see, these red lines, just a bunch of days I string together to see, what's going on. And it looks like after, tailing off for a period around February 18th to the 21st, where it's kind of tailing off, now it's starting to rise again. And the reason it's rising again is South Korea, Iran, and Italy, mostly. And that's all we have.